Well, hello everybody. This is a different video. It's a follow-up to my last video on the deceptions of Ed Miliband. And what we do in this video is with a chap called Ralph Ellis, who's a warrior like me fighting this madness of net zero, we discuss all aspects and go into maybe more detail. We range off into either side of the subject to fully explore really the madness of net zero. So it's a fairly long video, but I think you'll find it really fascinating. And Ralph Ellis himself is a fascinating man. And so without further ado, I'm going to cut straight to the chase and go into the interview with Ralph Ellis. Well, hello everybody. Today I'm with Ralph Ellis. Now, on my last video about the deception of Ed Miliband, Ralph wrote a very good comment, actually. It was so good that I thought it raises so more points that my video left out, if you like, because once you get to about 30 minutes, I think I better stop this video, otherwise go on for hours. So I tend to stop them after 30 minutes if I can. And but Ralph has come up with so many good points. I thought, what a great way to expand on the subject. But to go through his comment points. So this is literally lifted from a post. But first of all, let me introduce Ralph. Ralph's had a very varied career, I think, to say the least, a really interesting one. And he's written a paper on the ice ages and the effect of the albedo changing of the ice ages with dust from the, if you like, the Mongolian plateau and so on. But if Ralph, you could just tell us quickly, just to give a feel for the audience here, your varied career background, really.
Yes, I'm definitely a polymath. So I started as a mineral surveyor, trained in that, but unfortunately the miners' strikes ended that career because there were no jobs left. So I went into computing. I became a computer analyst in working for banks in London. But I was not terribly happy with that, so I became a commercial pilot instead, as one does, you know. So I've flown, I've flown the big jets for 45 years. But I always had other interests, and the unfortunate thing with aviation is you'll have a lot of downtime. So you have a lot of time sitting in hotels doing not a great deal. So my interests spread elsewhere. So I became a historian. And then latterly, with this nonsense with climate and so on, which I never sort of agreed with from the very start, I got into climate science. And I wrote a paper with, well, just myself. I wrote it for one of the websites. What's up with that? And one of the professors on the site who was there said, that's a very good paper, but why don't you write it as a peer review science paper, which I didn't really know how to do to. So he acted as my mentor and tutor, and he told me all of the various things you have to do to pass a paper off to a academic institution, which we did. So that it took quite a while, actually. It probably took me up to a year of doing all of that work. Getting all of the references, making sure things were not contradicted by other papers. So I had to read something like 70 papers on the topic, you know, to make sure that I knew the subject. And yes, it was passed through as through peer review, and has become one of the most read papers on climate. I think it's had 50,000 downloads at present, so that's quite high for.
Fantastic. Can I just say
For a
that I'm going
paper.
to put the link to that paper in the description to this video, so people will be able to reference that paper. It is a fascinating paper. But today, that's a hell of a background you've got
Yeah.
there. What fascinates me is your ability. You're a chameleon. The way you can change from one thing to the other, which is great. What it shows is a sort of mind that is needed in this work. That's what it shows. So to get down to the subject, it's about this NESO report that's just come out from well, NESO, the national. What is it? The national. It's the people who manage the power, if you like, and it's Ed Miliband's little baby. And so I'm going to bring up the first point, and the very first point you brought up about the video I made is flexibility in demand and power, i.e., power cuts. So when they say, let's discuss that. When they say flexibility in demand, what do they mean, Ralph?
Yes, well, they have peak loads, of course, and somehow they must overcome those peak loads. Now, at present, what they're doing mostly is using gas power plants and bringing extra generation on. That's not going to be so possible in the future because they want to get rid of as many gas plants as possible. So the other way of managing loads, peak loads, is by knocking off demand. Oh, I suppose another one, just while we're there, is they use places like Dinorwic, which is an emergency power station which uses pumped water, and that can pump another 2 gigawatts into the system, at like 7 o'clock when everyone turns on their kettles, after the football match or something. So Dinorwic can step in and give some extra power. They're not going to have enough backup in the future. So the alternative is to switch off your kettle, basically, and your heating and whatever else. So this is part of the reason for using smart meters, which is why I don't have a smart meter. A smart meter can be tuned to throttle your demand that you're making on the system.
Yeah.
So basically, it's power cuts by another name.
Yeah, you're quite right. I was the water resource engineer for Norwich at the time in the 70s when it's being built, and a great scheme, but it gives 1.7 gigawatts. I think there's a little bit extra they get now, which can take it up a little bit, but that's tiny, and it isn't long-term.
Yes.
You're looking at 1.7. It's only 9.1 is the normal design, 9.1 gigawatt hours. So it's 5 hours at a low
Yes.
level.
Yes.
It's not
And
meant.
the trouble is, it's going to get smaller and smaller. You see, as they put more and more demand onto the system because they want transport, they want heating, they want
Right.
industry all on electrical system,
Yeah.
that's going to triple, some people say quadruple, the
Yes.
amount of electricity demanded. And
Yeah.
so the ability of somewhere like Dinorwic or the new one, which is Corrie Glass up in
Yes.
Scotland, to alleviate any of this, it's going to get harder and harder for these systems to work.
That's right. So it's basically managing demand, and they're saying they've got to increase this demand management four or fivefold. By
Yes, yes,
the other point you made there was gas. Now, in that report, they actually say we've got to keep all the gas stations.
yes, they do.
Now, but we got Ed Miliband at the moment out in COP making a statement. He wants to halve them. Now, I'm
Oh, is
really
he?
yeah. So I'm really perplexed by this because his own report, if you like, says we've got to keep them. Not only
Yeah,
keep them, but keep them unabated, because an unabated simply means they're not burying the CO2, so they're just normal gas power plants, as it were. And it just fascinates me. They've also made the statement
yes.
they're going to be 85% CO2, 85% reduction within 10 years from now, which is, absurd.
I'm just amazed that these people don't know the topic enough, that they're having to react to the criticisms that we, people like you and I, have put down to Parliament. I mean, I've written all of my emails to all parliamentarians. So
Yeah,
I send my emails off to 600 MPs,
a good idea.
criticizing these reports that have come into government because most of them are absurd, written by children. The
Yes,
Climate Change Committee report was literally, it was copy and paste
yes,
from websites. I mean, that's
yes.
how bad it was.
And
And like you,
actually, sorry, the head of that, though, till recently, was receiving her income from two green energy sources. One of them, they're the biggest contributor to a salary, over £100,000 a year from these two sources, which he openly declared, by the way. And the biggest one was the one that wants CO2. Sorry, once it taken from the air, which is the most uneconomic thing you can imagine to capture CO2 from the air. Green, what they call green, green, it's just unimaginable what, what
yes,
what they're doing, and they've also got vested interests in it. And in fact, the whole of that committee are just green zealots. They're like children, like children.
totally. And so what their reports make no sense. I mean, with the storage in the Climate Change Committee report, they were quoting storage, and you've pointed this out in your videos as well. they were denoting storage in gigawatts,
Yes.
which is a complete nonsense. That is not a unit of storage.
Oh.
And they did so because they had copied it. I went through the links and they had copied it from a website, so they
Ah.
obviously don't understand the information they're actually putting in the reports. And the other thing with the CO2 capture and storage, which you're talking about, not one person so far, and I've been writing about this for like 10 years or more, not one person has explained how they can prevent a Lake Nyos disaster.
Can
For
you
those who,
explain that, please? Can you explain to our
yeah,
viewers what that is? And
Lake,
can I just give you a preamble? This is you bury the CO2, you store it
yep.
somewhere. So you store this CO2 somewhere. Yeah, this is the video I'm working on now is on this subject.
Yes.
And so this disaster that happened with CO2 needs explaining. So if you could do that for us.
Yes, what they want to do is capture this CO2. Presumably, they're going to capture it out of like a gas-fired power station or something where it's more concentrated. They want to separate it out, compress it. So it's under high pressure, 2000 psi. It's under very
Which
high
takes
pressures.
energy, which takes a lot of
It
energy.
takes a lot of energy. Whether this is going to be economic or not is another matter. Then they want to pipe it because you've got to store it somewhere. They want to pipe it down to old oil fields and pump it into the old oil fields, which will give you a little bit more oil because it pushes the oil out. And then you store the CO2 underground. But the trouble is, all wells that we've had, whether it's oil or water or whatever, they have a possibility of a blowout.
Yeah.
And that would be catastrophic. Now, they had a blowout in Africa at Lake Nyos. Now, this was a natural blowout. So, Lake Nyos, I think it's volcanic, this lake, and it had stored a load of CO2 underneath layers of water. And for some reason, I don't know, earth tremor or some sort of happening, it overturned itself and it started effervescing like a soda can.
Yeah.
As soon as you release the pressure, all of the CO2 comes out of the soda can and it comes out of the top of the can. Well, it did the same in the lake and it rolled down the valley from this lake and killed 2,000 people. Because CO2 is lethal. Because, okay, normally in the atmosphere, it is evenly mixed in the atmosphere, but when it comes out in a concentrated form, it's heavier than air and it just rolls down the valley and it suffocates anything and everything in its path. Now, if we have a CO2 blowout from one of these CO2 wells, we're going to have a problem because, the wells are going to be out in the North Sea and the CO2 might roll in, from the sea with a nice little easterly breeze, and it'll push up against, Newcastle and Tyneside and whoever's on the east coast there.
Also get a few ships on the whales.
Yeah, get a few ships on the way. Yeah, we'll have ghost ships all over the North
Right.
Sea with nobody left alive on them. I mean, this is a real problem, and nobody's explained to me how they're going to overcome this. Now, they're saying that the CO2 in the well will eventually turn into carbonates. But that's a long process. It's not
Very
going to
cool.
happen overnight. That's going to be a matter of decades before any of the CO2 is taken up in the rocks and carbonated. So we're going to have this possibility of a lethal blowout from CO2. And they've already had one in America. I mean, this is not pie in the sky. In America, they've been trying to do this CO2 carbon capture from the ethanol plants. They've got loads of these ethanol plants turning corn into ethanol, which is another stupid idea because, as far as I can see, it
It is.
takes a gallon of petrol to make a gallon of ethanol. So it's fairly pointless. But now they've been capturing the CO2, and again, they're piping it down across America, and they want to make something like 10,000 miles of these pipes going across America. RFK Jr. has made a very good video on this, so it's well worth watching. I don't know what it's called, but if you Google for YouTube RFK Jr. CO2 storage or something, you'll probably come up with it.
Right.
So they've got these high pressure pipes running across America, going down to the oil fields so they can pump it into the oil fields. And one of them broke recently. and it spread its CO2 out across this village. And they said it was a town of zombies, because when you're starved of oxygen, you lose half your mental capacity. And there was just all these people wandering around aimlessly in this town on the verge of death because of this CO2 blowout.
Incredible.
So, yeah.
Incredible. But somehow we have a parliament and our leaders, the people who do all this, who technically are incompetent to the highest level of incompetence. I mean, that's all I can say.
Well, yes, I've said this for a long time. Why don't we have an examination for people to get into Parliament? These are supposed to be the people leading the country, and they can't run a sweet shop. You have
They
people
can't.
like, Diane Abacus,
Yeah.
who can't, she can't add anything together. She was doing something with the police, and it was just absolutely laughable.
Well, I'm on television a reasonable amount, and I'm often in a green room with people, and I've been in the green room with ex-foreign ministers and things. And when you discuss things with them, you realise it. I knew they weren't great, but the disappointment in me that you couldn't hold. I mean, it literally is just brainwashed things. And when you say no, it's not quite that on any subject. That's it. They refer to an expertise outside themselves for everything. Every single bit is an appeal to authority, you know? And in fact, my latest video that's coming out is to do with CO2 capture. And it's actually was on with Jim Dale on it.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
and my thing with Jim is that no matter what subject we go on to, all he's going to do is repeat the latest weather events. Yeah. So I know beforehand what he's going to say. So I've got a new policy now, which is each interview I do, I'm going to get one message out to the public, just one.
Yes.
Ignore more or less what he says because it's meaningless. So that's
And
really interesting about that. So the next point you make is twice as many transmission lines costing 60 billion question mark. Now, on that, I know they've announced 60 billion from the national grid, but that is only the main artery. It's not the distribution, because to do what they're planning would require every single transmission, every single substation, every single road,
yes.
digging up your pavements. And a lot of houses in the UK have got very limited availability of energy and of electricity. The amperage is like 60, 80 amps, never mind the 100. I mean, to change all this, the 60 billion will be quite small. I've heard estimates of 500 billion for the other bit. But if we could talk
Yes.
about that transmission, what's involved and what's the impact on society in your view of what they're doing with that transmission lines, which are going to upset a lot of people.
Yes, but you make a very valid point. They're only mainly looking at one item, which is the main transmission lines. But even that's a problem, because in Germany they said, "Oh, we don't want all these transmission lines. You've got to bury them." So they're making this Swedlink, which is a HVDC line that goes from northern Germany down to the south, and it's caused untold problems, and it's cost them 10 billion just for one cable. So this 60 billion, the 60 billion was in the report. That was their figure.
Yeah.
But if they're forced to do buried HVDC lines, that figure could increase tenfold.
Yes.
So we could be talking 600, billion just for that. But then you make the very valid point that our domestic network is not made to take these quantities of energy. I saw I think it was either a scientist or a politician was saying that what we need to do is we put a charging point on every lamppost, and then we solve this problem of charging. And then of course someone very kindly pointed out that our lamppost cannot take a car charger on every lamppost. It will just blow the fuses everywhere, because you can't take that amount of energy through
Yeah.
that system. So
It's
all of those systems would have to be
all the
replaced.
substations
Yep.
everywhere. Yeah, everywhere.
So it's a real problem. And so this car revolution is probably not going to work. Most of the houses are not suited to having recharging facilities. We've got people draping electrical lines across pavements, which
Yeah.
that's not legal either. Don't
No,
don't start draping mains lines across the pavement. I've seen one that was on a fishing rod, so it went over the top of the pavement down onto the
Yep.
car. That's not legal either. You can't do that sort of thing. So it's going to be a real problem putting in the infrastructure if we want to go all EVs. It's just
Well,
not going to
going
work.
all EVs, Ralph, it's impossible. I mean, anyone with any common sense, this does not require any scientific understanding. It's impossible. If all the light vehicles, that's the vans and cars in the UK, went electric, it would actually consume the vast majority of the world's resources in batteries for a start,
Yes,
and
yes,
in raw materials for a start. But as you apply these demands, the cost of these things go up. I only have to look at the cost of copper and the way we've used all the easy mines, and additional mines are much more expensive, and it actually goes asymptotic, the graph in terms of cost.
yeah.
So,
But you get people like the Royal Society who made another report on energy storage. They said we could do all of net zero for 410 billion. But they assumed the total opposite. And these are supposed to be intelligent people. So they said, with economies of scale, the price of all of these products will come down by 90%. And I'm thinking, like yourself, I'm thinking, no, that's not going to happen.
no,
These resources are going to get more and more scarce, and the price will rocket
yeah.
instead.
I,
You
I
can
I mean,
imagine.
they say wind power is, the cheapest form of energy. It's 1/9, according to Ed Miliband. It's 9 times cheaper than gas. In actual fact, gas today, without the tax on it, without the carbon tax, because they put a 60 quid per megawatt hour carbon tax on, is actually £54 today. It's actually
Mm.
much cheaper than any alternative. But the whole thing is madness in the extreme. But when I try to rationalize this with the people I meet in the green rooms, the politicians and things, you can forget it. I mean, it's as bad as talking to Diane Abacus. It really is. And when you point out simple math to them, which take no, I mean, one of the famous graphs I always show is the Tony Heller graph of all the CO2 growth, all the COP meetings on. We're making no difference.
Yep,
All the
makes
COP
no
meetings
difference at all. Yep.
make no difference at all. And that's what we're in. So we'll move on to the next one. Carbon capture to allow gas generation, but they do not say how they'll prevent late night, as we've done that.
Yes.
Used underdeveloped technologies, fantasy projects. So underdeveloped technologies.
Yes.
Talk.
Well, they didn't specify, and this is the problem. So we are betting the farm on this report that says that underdeveloped technologies will arrive. Um, so they they've got no clue what these technologies will be, if they will ever work, whether they'll be feasible and economic. But that is going to save us, in the next. It's only 5 or 15 years, depending on what date they're using,
Yeah,
that all of this has to be done.
yeah. But
And
it's
suddenly technologies are suddenly going to arrive to help us and save the day. No, I don't think
fairies,
so.
fairies. This is the fairies. I do fairies dancing around them on this because it really is fairyland. So undeveloped technologies, but even the ones they quote, like air capture for CO2 and things, are so costly. I mean, and it's almost as if money doesn't matter in all of this.
Yes.
It's almost as if, and all the estimates are always way under. I've looked at there's a professor in Edinburgh University who's done work and actually looking at the costs of wind farms from the accounts of all these companies, the wind energy companies, and what he's finding is after 15 years, the maintenance costs are so high that it's not worth carrying on unless you get more and more subsidy. Yeah. And in
Yes.
fact, what they've done is extend the life, theoretically, of these wind farms to 25 years. And he also found that the higher class turbines, as you pass the 2 megawatt turbines up to 4, 5, and so on, they're much shorter life. There's much more maintenance
Mm.
because it's a bit like a Formula One racing car that gets maintained as it's going round the laps, and certainly after each race, it's fully overhauled to make sure it's perfect. And it's a bit like that, and so the cost of these things. So it's almost like well, it's a scam now because people are investing pension funds and all this sort of thing into this green energy, and the payback isn't there. the money's been creamed off early, and after 15 years, it's gone, right? And that's what's going to be happening.
Yes,
But what they assume in the report and things is the costs will stay the same. In other words, the maintenance costs of a wind farm will stay exactly the same every year.
mm,
Yeah, and it doesn't. If you buy a car and you want to keep it going 25 years, I promise you, as you go through with that car, the maintenance costs will rise. Yeah, things wear out. And I just find the whole thing unbelievable that they continue
yes, and
building a
I
profit.
questioned all of their economics on this as well because um, all of their costings were on the construction of this equipment. And I said in my report to government, hold on a minute. If we're going to compare this with, say, a nuclear power station will last for 60 years,
Yeah.
whereas your wind turbines will need replacing after 20, 30 years
Well,
maximum. So you need to double the price of your construction because you've got to replace every single one
yeah.
after 25 odd years.
Yes.
And that's an extra huge cost that they're not taking into account.
Hmm.
And so their costings are pie in the sky. It's
Okay.
all fantasy, really.
I don't know how they get away with it. That's what gets me. Going to your next point then. Well, they admit that CCS and hydrogen are both unproven technologies of scale. It's the same point, really.
Yeah.
They're just totally unproven. In fact, if you take CO2 capture, it's been a total disaster everywhere it's been
Mm.
tried, and not one is economically viable. But
Yes.
we're spending on that. We're spending 22 billion.
Yes, another 22 billion. But what they didn't say is they did this 10 years ago under the Conservative government, and it was much lesser amount. It was something like 50 million or something to do a test
Yeah,
site for CO2 carbon capture, and it didn't really work.
no,
So they've already been through half of this process before and proved that it was uneconomic.
I never knew that bit. So thank you.
Yeah, yes.
Right. So, right. Next one, the next point, smart charging. You plug in your car and nothing happens because at one point,
Yes, they want smart.
yeah, well, they're going to be able to pinch your car battery energy. So when you
Yes.
get up in the morning to go to work in your smart car, you can't go. Is that it? Or what
Yes,
logic?
they want
Explain
smart
the logic.
charging. So this is a part of this smart meter business that
Yes.
when we come to peak times, your car won't charge. So we come to 7, 8 o'clock at night,
Right.
which is a peak demand time,
Yes.
and your car charging will switch off, so it
Yes.
won't charge. Now you're hoping that you'll get sufficient charge overnight. But then they want during the smart charging, they want to be able to steal your your energy as well. So at 7 o'clock at night or even 7 o'clock in the morning, they want to take charge out of your car and
Yes.
use that for the grid.
Yes.
This is smart charging.
Yeah.
So you jump into your car at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock to go to work, and the grid has stolen half of your energy from your car. I,
Yes.
I can't imagine people would ever agree to that happening. So you'll get people waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and taking their car off charge so they can't steal the energy back again.
That's
Um,
right. People will react and adopt to get
they
round it.
will.
That's not allowed for. I mean, what I've done is I actually bought a house recently, about 3 years ago, and it already had a smart charger in. You can't get it. You can't. Sorry, a smart meter in. So I can't get it reversed. There's no one will
Ah,
reinstall it. You can't go backwards. And I, because the other house I had, I just refused to have them. Right.
yes, yes.
What I've done here is I put a generator in actually with an automatic trip. So if we get a power cut, the generator cuts in. Yes.
Mm.
And that's the only way I can feel fairly safe at the madness of the world we're going into. Right. And so that's what I've done to help get round it.
But you have to do it. I've got a backup bottle gas heater just in
Yes.
case. So you
Yeah,
have to look after yourself in this
you
fashion.
do. Yes. And this madness. Going to the next one then. They claim total electricity generation is 500 terawatt hours per annum by 2050. This makes no sense. Current UK energy usage is 1,200 terawatts per annum, terawatt hours per annum. So either we will not be net zero or they will halve your energy usage. Explain.
Okay. Yes, a lot of these politicians seem to forget that electrical demand is having to increase for net zero. Now, it's going to have to go up threefold, some say fourfold. Now, Professor McKay, who was the previous government science advisor, he said it would have to go up fourfold in order to cope with heating, with transport, and with industry as well. And so we end up with a lot more electrical generation. And our present projected at our current usage of total energy is 1,200 terawatt hours per year. Now, the Royal Society said we're going to go, no, was it Royal Society? No, it was the Climate Change Committee said we're going to go down to 500 terawatt hours per year. So they're reducing our electrical demand by more than half in their estimation, but not saying exactly how we're going to achieve those gains. So basically what they're going to do is throttle our demand for energy.
Yes.
Now, whether that's heating, whether that's transport, whether that's just domestic usage, whether that's industry, they're going to throttle our demand for energy. And people don't seem to realize that. They think that, renewable energy is so cheap, we're going to have loads of it. No, they're actually going to try and halve the amount of energy that we're using per annum. And that's a problem.
That's right. Well, one of the things I pointed out in previous videos I've made is as we increase, as we treble and so on the wind energy, that overnight when we don't need that demand and we're paying this constraint payments, the constraint payments are going to really shoot up because there's no way of
Yes.
storing it. There's just no way. Forget this energy storage or any long-term energy storage. Forget batteries and things. There's no proper storage, which is why the report says we need the gas stations, although it
Yes.
doesn't say we need more of them, which the Royal Society of Engineering says we do actually. So, but the constraint rates are going to be enormous. In my video, I pointed out that there's a recognition of this to some extent that it's going to be, but everything else has to work. So all these new ventures and these untried technologies all have to work in time, because if they don't, we'll be contracted in to all these enormous expenses, which alone could treble at times the cost of and quadruple the cost
Yes.
of energy, right?
Yes. Just
Is.
in case people don't understand the constraint payments, what happens is if a wind farm is told to turn itself off because there is too much power, they get paid anyway, whether they're generating or not generating. So that's the problem. And they've had this problem over in Scotland where there is a constriction in the amount of energy that can come out of Scotland because there's not enough grid lines heading south. And so quite often the Scottish farms are told to shut down because there is a bottleneck there. But they get paid whether they're shut down or not. So
51% of the time in one case.
yes.
51% of the
So
time.
yes, they're sort of laughing all the way to the bank. Now the idea was, of course, all of that extra energy at night and various other low periods was supposed to go into long-term storage, into pumped water storage systems. But as you say, none of those are being planned.
No.
We've got Dinorwig, we've got Corrie Glass up in Scotland, which is still not built, of course. But they've got to have plans for hundreds of these stations, not just one or two. And of course, those plans are not there. So there will not be any storage. And that's why, as you say, they're going to have to keep the gas power plants going.
If you take Corrie, which is 30 gigawatt hours,
Yep.
if you take Dinorwig at 9.1, they have got a bit of extra water at times, but reliable 9.1 gigawatt hours. Let's call that 40 altogether. I always take my 9 days in 2018. It's not the worst by any chance, by the way, and there's been a recent one, but a more recent ones. But I take that because I did a video many years ago where I calculated that was 7,200 gigawatt hours needed to back up that wind loss. You're looking at 40 and you need 7,200. This is the scale,
yes.
the mismatch, right? And somehow something comes into their brains at this point that doesn't allow them to sort of balance this in their minds. So what we're into reminds me almost of the witchcraft trials, going back hundreds of years, where, I mean, in America, Harvard gave degrees in witchcraft. Yeah, and doctors of witchcraft. Yeah, and so on. So it's very much like that. It's to do with an ideology where you have to ignore everything passing you, yes, and just carry
Yes.
on with it. And we've got the arch witchcraft leader with Ed Miliband.
Yes, he is the worst of all. Yes.
My dream, I'm 18 in January. So my dream before I die is to interview Ed Miliband on this. That would be the most wonderful, if I could have that, that would be my paradise interview.
Yes, he would be a fish out of water if he got some decent
You can
questions.
say
He
that
wouldn't,
again.
and
So
in your 7,000 gigawatt hours, I've increased that because the 7,000 is to cope with our current electrical
correct,
system.
correct.
If we have to multiply our electrical system threefold
Yes.
to cover the transport and the heating and the industry, then the storage needs to increase as well. So we're talking more like 20 or 30,000 gigawatt hours,
Yes.
and we've got 40.
Yes. Well, actually, Brian Catt contacted me and he said, Paul, do you realise if we build batteries to back up, he came up with 7,000 on his batteries to back up that would be 200, stacked 200 foot high for the entire perimeter of the.
Yes.
And he worked out they weigh billions of tons. Yes. So I
And
actually converted that to lithium batteries and it'd be 50 foot high around the. So, I mean, they're costing many, many trillions. So when I come up with 3.5 trillion to do the batteries for my smaller amount, right?
mm,
When I come up with that, I know that if you put that demand onto the world system, the price would rocket. So it would
yes.
be three and
So,
a half.
yes, it wouldn't be 3 trillion, it would be more. Yes, I made the total 11 trillion pounds
I can be a
to
totally
get to my 30,000 gigawatt hours. But as you say, prices would rise, so that 11 trillion would easily go to 20 or 30 trillion
well, you can't
in
afford it, can
pounds.
you? The whole economy is just servicing the battery. Yes.
Yes.
Well, there isn't an economy, is there?
No.
Because without energy, energy is the key. I always put it this way when I explain this in my talks to people. I'll say, well, we used to have people hand weaving, and then we came up with steam as a source of energy, which is fossil fuel energy, if you like, and coal. And what happened was one person could do the work of 100. And overall, that is why a modern economy is more efficient. We all specialize in different subjects, and we have energy, but cheap energy is fundamental, absolutely fundamental to economic prosperity. And what
Yes.
we're doing is killing our economies. We are.
Yes.
I think that's hopefully going to be reversed a bit now in the USA, you know? So what's the name of the cat?
This is Sekhmet, and
What?
he's very inquisitive. He wants to
Yeah,
see everything.
there we are. Has he got any views on this subject?
He's probably got more views than Ed Miliband, that's for sure.
Right, going on to the next one on the list. They hope that more efficient light bulbs. Yeah, they mentioned the efficiency of light bulbs in the future.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely crazy. If you, I've not actually researched this, but I'm sure if you research the energy used by light bulbs, it's the smallest component of energy usage
Well,
there is.
everyone's changed over. You were forced to it.
Yeah, you're forced to anyway. So, but the big users of energy are transport, so motion
Hmm.
and heating
Motion and heat.
and industrial processes. Light bulbs are probably 0.01% of the energy we use.
I think that's a bit
So
high, actually. Right.
yes,
At this
so
point, carry on, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, so their point that getting more efficient light bulbs will save the planet is just absurd.
Yeah. I live in Wales and they've done away with the almost 3,000 jobs in Port Talbot Steel. Yeah. And actually, it's more like 8 to 10,000 jobs because there are
Mm.
satellite companies all going bust. There are shops that are having to close. The whole economy of the area gone. Yeah, destroying. And now, in my time, I obviously had to design steel buildings and various other things like that in my early career. And when you have steel, you need to know the exact specification of it. You need to know what the tensile strength is and so on. And you can't use steel made from scrap for that. That's too
Yes.
rare. So the high quality steel is what an engineer can make machines out of, do all sorts of things. And you know that the steel in your piston rod, for example, will take this load. Yes? You can't do that with scrap steel. So now we have to import that from China because closing. We have to import that from China, which increases the CO2 and increases By the way, when I call pollution, I mean real pollution. CO2 is not a
Mm.
pollutant. But you increases that because of the lower standards. So you increase the pollution in the world. I mean, what I did in the past with my missus, we sailed mostly around the world. So I sailed a bit of the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific, sailed right across. And I intentionally went through the garbage patch to try to find it. And we couldn't find it. It's not there, you know. And these
Yes.
things are always remote. These scare stories are always so remote that you can't readily go and look how many polar bears there are. You know, you can't go outside your garden and count the polar bears. People who do that, they've trebled, but you can't do that. They're always remote. And this garbage patch, when it couldn't be found by others, they said, "Oh, it's become micro now, so it isn't floating anymore. You can't see it anymore," and it carries on. The excuses carry on. You know, I've been an environmentalist all my life, even the age of 11. I was contributing out of my pocket money to a charity to clean our rivers, you know. And I've been in charge of data for a whole country to do with river pollution and all this sort of thing, you know. So, and in fact, I left the water industry because of the covers up on pollution and so on. And the more I found that every public authority gears itself around itself. It doesn't gear itself for the public. It actually is always back to itself. So when I try to uncover, I had the Anti-Coastal Pollution League contact me and say, "Is this true? We've got these raw sewage outfalls into the sea." So those are true, but there's a lot more than that. So I gave them more. Now my attitude was that public authority, there's the truth. We haven't
Mm.
got the money to do it. So at least let's recognize the problem. Otherwise, you never get a solution. Oh, no, no. The whole thing came down to me then from the highest levels. No, you can't do that.
You can't tell people,
You
yes.
can't tell people the truth, and that's right the way through the whole ethos of government. And in fact, I sat on a quango representing Wales, which I managed to do away with by just going away and doing the work, you know, rather than waiting a couple of years and spending a fortune. So you know, I'm very much a rebel like that, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they talk about, well, your point was unabated gas will be used as backup, CO2 emitting generation. That unabated just means it's a normal one, doesn't bury the CO2. They do not mention that gas capacity will therefore have to increase, but you'll need to double unabated gas generation as a backup. Comment.
Yeah, I found this very interesting because it sort of demonstrates that they didn't realize the problem with storage. So initially they were saying we could store all of this energy using the overnight generation from wind turbines, etc., until the likes of you and I told politicians and these supposed scientists that this was pie in the sky. It was a fantasy. This storage is not going to happen because it's too expensive. So now they're saying, oh, we'll keep some of these gas-fired power stations running. But that's hugely uneconomic because these gas-fired power stations are going to be sitting there for 300 days without working,
Fully
and
staffed.
then
Yeah.
they're going to be called into action, you know, when there's no wind and no solar. And suddenly they're going to spring into action and make up the difference. But that's wholly uneconomic. These people are going to have to be sitting there in these power stations, twiddling their thumbs for 300 days, waiting for them to be called into action. So that is going to, and all of those costs have to be added on to the renewable costs, which is what they're not doing at present. So
Yes.
they're saying renewables are cheap, but you've got to keep these power stations on standby. But what they've not calculated, they said they're going to have to keep all of our gas-fired power stations. So we've got something like, I think it's 34 gigawatts or something of gas
Sorry, that's correct.
power at present. But when we expand the electrical demand because of transport, heating, and industry onto electricity, there's going to be a shortfall again. They're going to have to increase the number of gas-fired power stations sitting on standby in order to cope with full net zero.
Yes.
So it's not going to be all of our gas-fired power stations. It's going to be something like double the number. At present, you know, during the winter, we use something like just over 40 gigawatts of energy at present. Now, with everything running on electricity, that's going to be more like 120 gigawatts.
Yes.
And all of that has to be backed up somehow. Otherwise, when the big anticyclone comes over Europe, you know, and we get no
Now.
wind and no sun, in winter, suddenly you've got to make up that difference of 120 gigawatts somehow. Now we'll have a little bit of nuclear, maybe we'll have a little bit of bio, perhaps. We might even have a little tiny dribble of wind, going. So we're going to have to make up something like 80 gigawatts of energy to maintain ourselves during, anticyclonic conditions in the winter. And they've not budgeted for that. None of that is in the calculations for the price of renewable energy.
Yeah. So when I was looking at that report, they just left that as a gaping hole. They just said, "Oh,
Yes.
we need it to be unabated." And the reason for that, of course, is that if it's not unabated, besides that it doesn't work, the CO2 barrel, besides all the problems with that, if if you have if you have it abated, it uses a lot of energy to do the abating, to do the burying.
Yes.
And you can lose up to, I've seen figures of up to 40% of the energy of the gas station can be used just to cope with all of that. Never mind the additional costs of that, by the
Mm.
way. They're ignored as well. And so it's just incredible. The whole thing is just out of this world as regards,
I can't believe that they wrote these reports. It's like the reports are written by children. The Royal
That's right.
Society did the same. You're talking about these inefficiencies. They did the same with the hydrogen storage.
Yes.
They were saying we can store hydrogen and use that to generate electricity, and we can go through that later, perhaps.
Yeah.
But what they didn't calculate is that the hydrogen battery, as it were, is only about 20-25% efficient.
Correct.
So you're losing all of this energy in this battery. Therefore, you need more generation capacity to charge up the battery. And they didn't allow for that extra generation capacity when they were calculating the costs.
Yes, I know.
So
Well,
there
you
was a
get,
big deficit in their calculation.
yeah, you believe me, you get these reports from, normal, sensible authorities sometimes, and they're written by maybe a green kid or something. And that's all I can think of
Yes.
because you just look at it, it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. And
And also it's wrapped up in tons and tons of I don't know what you call it, guff maybe.
I call it copy
It's
and paste. Yeah.
copy and paste, and it's made doubly complicated just to sound as though they know what they're talking about. And a lot of these papers could be written in 20 pages, and yet you've got a 250-page report. But the actual data that you want to know is about 20 pages of that.
That's right.
And so we're paying for all these reports. None of the politicians who are reading these reports understand it because
No.
it's so difficult to deliberately made impossible to understand.
Oh, they
And
don't even
so
use the right units. They don't even use the right.
yes, the wrong
You can't get
units.
to it.
Yes. So none of the politicians have a clue as to what's going on because these are very poorly written reports.
Yes.
I could do much better. I could summarize these reports and give that data to Parliament in maybe less than 10 pages
That's
in
right.
very clear and concise language.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember once being in a meeting in the Southwest, meeting of three river authorities planning reservoir systems, and one of them had done 20 years work on it, and I pointed out they'd forgotten to fill the reservoirs up again. And as simple as that. And 20 years work. And when I mentioned this, the reports were bound. They'd bound the copies 5 feet high, presented to the meeting of the whole of the Southwest. And I just flicked over some things, and I realized they're getting more out than they put in for a direct supply reservoir, which you can't do. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not a regulated reservoir where you regulate the river. No, this direct supply, like a bathtub. Yeah. You can't
Yes.
get more out. And next to the next one, more out, next one, more out. And they take the calculation down. And the first month the river flow increased. They stopped the calculation and said, that's the storage. And they carried on. It would be forever decreasing. And they said, that's a very interesting concept. And the 20 years work went up into smoke. Yeah. So
Yep.
I've almost, that was the very beginning of my career, actually. And I don't think things have changed since. That's disappointing in a way. So go on to your next point. Well, battery storage we've dealt with. And then let's talk about, we'll go into more detail maybe on Cottingham. I featured it myself. And so let's talk about Cottingham, the Cottingham battery. I think that's 198 megawatt hours from memory.
Mm,
And I think I think it now put at 94 or 96 rate. So it can output 50% of its capacity. That's its output speed. And its amount is in megawatt hours, as it were. Its output is half of that at the speed. So it'll last for 2 hours at full whack. Yeah.
mm.
And let's talk about Cottingham then.
Yeah, these are chemical batteries. These are Tesla batteries, basically.
Yeah,
And they're still talking about these things as storage.
I know.
I caught them this morning. The National Grid is on Twix on Twitter, and they were calling it storage.
Yeah,
And I had to write back and say, hold on, this is not storage. You're not storing any energy because the energy is so small. As you say, it's 0.2 of a gigawatt hour, which is nothing.
yeah,
When you're talking about 7,000 and maybe we're talking about 25,000 gigawatt hours required,
yes.
and we've got 0.2. So it's not storage. And I wish they would stop talking at it in this fashion, because the whole of the Climate Change Committee report to government was talking about these chemical batteries as storage.
Yeah, sure.
And quoting in the wrong units as well. They were quoting in gigawatts. They're not storage. They're only used for frequency stabilization and generation stabilization, because these renewable resources, whether it's solar or whether it's wind, they have no intrinsic stability within their system, because each turbine is working at a different rate, and you end up with a grid that is very unstable. Now, it has to be kept up at 50 hertz. I think we're using 50 hertz in this country. Some use 40 hertz. It's got to be within, if I remember correctly, half a hertz
Yeah.
um, in terms of its frequency. Otherwise, the whole of the grid shuts down. Now, that's what happened in South Australia when they had some instability caused by a thunderstorm, and there was nothing to keep the grid stable, and the whole grid collapsed within about, I don't know, it was like 30 seconds, the whole of the grid went down. I was surprised they managed to get it up and working again so quickly, because it's a very difficult thing to do. But normally what they do is they match the frequency to a coal-fired power station,
Yep.
because a coal-fired power station has this enormous great turbine working at, I think they spin them at 2000 RPM or something, and it weighs about 200 tons. And so it's very, very reliable 50 hertz of energy. Now, they are all gone. We don't have those anymore. So you have to have some other way of making the grid stable.
Which
Now,
is
they've
Ed
just,
Miliband's flywheels were part
yeah, so
of
they've started buying these flywheels as another way of doing it. You can do it with these batteries, these
it.
chemical batteries. They're good at making up the differences from these unreliable sources. But you can also use these flywheels.
Yes.
And they've just bought one in Ireland, which they're just fitting out. And this is an enormous, great flywheel that is attached to a condenser, I think it's called. And through various electrical tricks, it maintains stability. But this flywheel in Ireland was something like £10 million just for this flywheel. And we're going to need about 10 of these, at least in Britain.
Yeah.
Plus, we're going to need all of these batteries. And they're not doing anything to act as storage. They're just trying to maintain the stability of the system, because we don't have enough stability within the grid.
But they used the
Um,
word storage with the flywheels. When that was announced, Ed Miliband and all that, I did a video on it because they used the word storage.
yes.
And I was asked to help with a solar farm proposal outside Swansea. And when I went along to the public meeting, I went to the first official there and said, how much energy do you provide? And he said, we provide 20 megawatts. So I said, no. How many megawatt hours does this? And he said, no, I provide 20. So he said,
It's
it's the same. So I said,
it's
no, it's not.
nonsense. Yes.
I said, when you buy electricity at home, what you buy? And he said, a kilowatt. So I said, no, you don't. You buy a kilowatt hour. Yeah, that's an amount. Yeah. So he said, I think you better speak to the boss. So I went to the boss and I had exactly the same conversation in the boss. Yeah. And then I said, where's your environmental report? Because this place was really sensitive environmentally. And he said, oh, we don't need one because it supplies the 10,000 houses. Yes. And it becomes strategic. So under the rules, we don't need an environmental report. Yeah. And of course, it doesn't supply. They always base these number of houses on assuming 80% is coming from gas. Yeah, because that's the off-gem typical house, as it were. And so, as you drill down, you realize these people, they said, write in and we'll give you the answers. And I wrote in, they didn't give any answers, of course. And the whole thing is just a PR exercise that
Mm.
assumes you're thick to begin with, assumes no one can question it. Yeah. And that's how it works. I'm dealing with the Isle of Man, which is, it's madness on steroids at the moment.
Mm.
Yes. And the reason I'm dealing with the Isle of Man, I'm putting so much effort in there, is because there's only 85,000 people there. It's like a small town in the UK, but they're independent. They're independent from the UK. They have their own government. And there's only 24 what they would call MPs. They call them MHKs. So there's a chance of actually changing it. So my ambition,
Yes. Yes.
before I kick the bucket, to at least change the Isle of Man to a more sensible policy. Yes?
Well, yeah, but hopefully it'll be a microcosm which can be copied by the rest of the parliamentarians in Britain,
Yeah.
because at present they're getting very very poor information. That climate change committee report,
Yes.
its section on storage was all about chemical batteries,
I know.
and as you point out, that is not storage. That's not
Correct.
what they are there for,
Yeah.
and therefore any politician reading that will, because it said we are um, on course for the
I know.
amount of storage we require. So any politician reading that will think, oh, well, the storage problem has been solved because
Yeah.
it says so
I
in
know.
this report. But it was nothing to do with storage. It was
No.
all to do with frequency and
Frequency
capacity
stabilize, well,
stability.
stabilizing the
Yeah.
frequency. I
Yes.
actually spoke to a bloke who actually has to manage. His job is to manage the grid, in Wales, part of Wales, and he said, "Well, if we go down, if the system goes down, there's only two or three places I can start it up again.
Yes.
It fails, it collapses right throughout, and it can take a week or two to get it up going again because one starts another, starts another, starts another sort of thing."
Mm.
And that's what he was. That was a few years back. He was telling me that it isn't simple to start the grid up again. I can
No.
promise that.
Yes, I don't think people realize this. I think there are other ways of doing it now, but for a long time, for like
Yeah,
30 years, there was a hydro plant up in Scotland that
yeah,
sat there. Um, one of their turbines, no, two of their turbines sat there doing nothing. And their whole point of being there was in order to start up the grid.
yes,
So they were just there, as a standby, just in case the grid went down, and that would be the only way to start the grid. Now,
yeah,
I have heard that Drax is now able to start itself.
yeah.
So it's a self-starting power station.
It's
I'm not
unusual.
quite sure how they achieve that.
Yeah. So coming up to the other points now. I mean, you mentioned wind. We've almost covered most of it now, actually. And
Well,
uh,
the wind there, something that people don't realize is we do lose the wind quite a lot, and this is quite important. This is why we need the storage or the gas backup or whatever they're going to use now. That the wind can disappear, and the longest I've seen recently is 21 days.
yes,
Back in 2021,
yeah,
where we lost wind power for 21 days. Now, wind power was below 80%, so effectively we'd lost most of the wind.
yeah,
Um, so we definitely do need some sort of backup. And the other thing that's not reported, because Ed Miliband is a solar freak,
yeah.
um, is that we lose sun. Now, they keep saying, all of the greenies I keep talking to, saying, oh, these new solar panels are fantastic. They work in the winter. No, they don't. Please, can I squash this idea that solar panels work in the winter?
Yeah.
I've had numerous people telling me that they do. But if you look at the output, you can get the figures. There's several agencies give you the figures now. I tend to use Drax because I like their presentation. And you can dial in past generation for the last, I think they've got 5 years. So you can do it by week, by month, by 6 months, by year, and you can see the generation. And there is no real solar generation during the winter in the UK.
That's when you need it most.
Um, yeah, that's when we need it most. That's when there's greatest demand. We're at 52 degrees north, going up to, 50, 56 degrees north. So the sun is low. The sun is only out really in generation capacity for about 6 hours.
Yeah.
It's low in the sky, so all of the solar panels are not aligned with the sun unless you're going to change the orientation of
God.
all the solar panels, which they don't do at present. So you're not going to get any. So, and of course, we have terrible weather in the winter as well. So you get these, like we've had for the past week, where we've had a low cloud base for the
No
week.
sunshine. The Met Office said actually no sunshine at
No
all.
sunshine, yes. There was no generation for the last week because conditions were so terrible.
Yes.
And we're not even in real winter at present.
No.
So please, Mr. Millipede, stop this solar nonsense because solar power is useless.
Yes.
Now, it's generating during the summer, but we don't need it during the summer. That's the low demand, part of the year.
That's right.
We need it when we need the heating for all of the industry and all of our
And
domestic dwellings.
heat and motion are the big consumers
Yeah,
energy.
heat and motion,
Heat.
and industry, of course. And so we don't need the solar during the summer, which is when it's going to generate. So it's perfectly useless. What they're doing is they're building a generation system,
Right.
solar power, when you're going to need to build another generation system that will work in the winter. So you're building two systems
But we
for
are with
for
wind.
one
We
generation.
are, we are with wind because we need the gas and we need the other source.
Yes,
And nuclear, when it comes, if you like, is still only a base load. It can't react quickly. So you still need something that can react quickly to demand relatively quickly.
yes,
And that's gas.
yes.
And whilst gas can be a base load, it can be both. Nuclear and bio is just ridiculous. I've made
Yes, let's
whole
not get
videos
onto the
on that.
bio.
How to cut down trees in America and transport them. And it just, instead of, it used to be, Drax used to have coal power and it used to be a few miles away. And so,
Yes,
of course, coal is twice the density of the wood anyway. So you'd have half the amount coming by train and burning it a few miles. Now we bring it from the other side of the world. Yeah. And actually 500 scientists did write to them when they started this years ago to say, don't do it.
yes.
They were ignored because it
And
actually isn't even green. Yeah.
and of course it only works because of the subsidies, as
Yeah.
usual. So we've got to pay extra. They're saying it's cheap, but it only works because of the subsidies.
And the point of
And
like
then the gaslighting is terrible because when they built this, they said, oh, it'll only be using offcuts of wood, all
yeah,
the
I
wood
know.
you cannot use for, proper lumber or timber. But of course, that's not what they're doing anymore. They're using virgin trees.
Correct.
So the whole thing was a fantasy from the very beginning, and this is where you've got to be very careful about these snake oil soil
There you go.
salesmen that are selling you these products, saying the fantasy products, saying they will work, and then of course when you come down to it, it's completely the opposite. They don't work, they're very expensive, and they only work with a subsidy.
Yeah. But look, on the solar, lots of people, I get this mail all the time. You can get free solar panels if you qualify, blah, blah, blah. That's still a cost onto everybody else.
Mm.
There's no such thing as free with solar panels and batteries. So all these people getting the free setups, right? And by the way, those batteries have to be replaced in maybe 10 or 12 years. But it's not, nothing is free in this world. And so all these extra costs coming on to the cost of electricity. And I love the way they quote gas prices. They quote gas price at the moment at £114 a gigawatt hour, when it's actually £60 of that is the carbon tax. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's only £54. And actually, there was a study done with the Ukraine war when actually wind did become cheaper for a short period. But if you not had the wind over the 5 year period since we started this, it's cost us £18 billion more to have the wind. Yeah, just on that study, because gas prices now, the Ukraine effect is more or less out of the system now because we've got the frack gas from as compressed gas coming in to Milford Haven and places, coming into the country from the States, which has saved us to some extent. And also Norway, they have a fantastic system with hydro, and that's pump storage. Hydro is when you make it out to the actual river flow. So, fascinating. This world is all I can
I,
say.
and that is a good point as well. And this came out 15 years ago, I think, maybe even 20 years ago. There was a report on Danish wind power.
Yes,
Why, I think the report was called "Why Wind Works for Denmark," and
yes,
they were using just that. So Denmark has an enormous amount of wind power,
yes. Per
but it
capita,
has
the
no,
highest in the world.
yeah, and it still is, yes, and but it has no mountains. So when it was over generating, they used to give this power to Scandinavia
Yeah,
that has loads of hydro,
yes,
and they were replacing their hydro with wind power from Denmark.
yeah.
So Denmark was forced to sell this energy very cheap to Scandinavia because the Scandinavians didn't really want it, really.
No,
But then when there was no wind, the Scandinavians were generating hydro and giving it back to Denmark.
yes.
But again, the Scandinavians didn't need to do that, so they sold it at a very expensive price to Denmark. So Denmark was selling cheap and buying expensive, and
Expensive.
they had the most expensive electricity in the whole of Europe.
Correct.
So yeah, and that was the result of wind power, of course.
But
So when
we've paid over £9,000 a megawatt hour
mm,
when we had to save London a few years back from a blackout, in effect. That's the world we're in. Are there any other points you'd like to mention at this point before we?
no, what else have I got on there? Yes, solar power. We've talked about solar
Yeah,
power. Yes, doesn't work in the winter, doesn't work at night. There's a wonderful video. People look it up of the Australian Prime Minister Albo saying that the future is here with us, and
yes.
what we're looking at in the future is your car being charged overnight with solar power, and then you drive to work the next morning. And he actually said this on national television.
That's
And
impressive.
this is the quality of the people we have in government that are making these important decisions. And the point has to be made that you cannot have the likes of Ed Millipede, Red Ed Millipede, because he's obviously some sort of communist or
Yes, he is.
Marxist, making these decisions because they don't know what they are talking about. And
Correct.
this is the problem. We need to improve the quality of our parliaments.
How'd you do
We
that?
need some sort of entrance examination into Westminster so we get better quality politicians that can make, because these are important decisions.
Yes.
These decisions can make or break a country. They can
Well,
make or break your life, your quality of life,
mm,
very, very easily by
very
wasting
quickly.
yeah, very quickly,
But
but
Millipede
wasting
studied
trillions.
politics at university, didn't he? He did the three Ps or something.
Yeah.
I mean, but it seems to be a qualification for not being able to add up. I
Yes.
mean, what really gets me, my job all the time is to try to get the message over to everybody. I really do try to simplify things, and I know recently we were both involved in trying to get something going in Colchester, and
Yes.
well, you and I were going to be on one side. We wanted two of the opposition people on the other side. And on the other side, the Green Party came up with a solution to this. They wanted 16 of them to two of us. Yeah. because that would give a fair balance of the views, you know. And this is the Green Party. And I actually had an interview when I arrived in the Isle of Man. They people who arranged it, Sue who arranged it all was fantastic because I arrived running the ground, hitting the ground fast. So I had it started off with a Manx radio thing, which is on YouTube as well, and I had a Green Party leader there. And to sum it up, what the best comment was 99% of I was only one person who was a friend supported her, but 99.9% of the comments were saying, she's bad. And one bloke said, well, let's put the Green Party in the Isle of Man back 20 years in one go. All she did the whole time was attack me as far right and so on. The whole time. Though, and when I gave her calculations, just ignore it. And you realise these people don't understand anything on
No,
any
they don't.
level. On any level.
And that is very common, that response. I've had it numerous times where you get into a debate, and I like doing these debates on Facebook or
Yeah,
Twix or whatever, because it sharpens me.
yes,
I get people putting points that maybe I'd not considered that point before,
yeah,
so it
I agree.
sharpens my ability to debate these topics. But the
Yeah,
vast majority of these people just de degenerate into abuse because they've got
correct.
no answer to any of your points, any of your calculations, any
Yeah.
of your data. And so all they do is, you get the standard, you're a Nazi, you're a far right, whatever.
I was
Um,
on, yeah, on that. I was on television, I mean, discussing air turbulence, which being as a pilot, you know about. And all I did was disclose the graph from the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, of all the reported turbulence, which is pretty well level graph, right?
yes.
And I said, well, science is about observation in the end. If it doesn't agree with observation, forget it. But this professor in Reading had come up with this. He studied a little part on a model of the North Atlantic, which you're probably used to flying, actually, I would think. And he said, it's definitely increasing with climate change, blah, blah, blah. So all I did was produce this. I said, that's observation. Anyway, he reacted to that on Facebook. And he accused me of being associated with them. I think I've never been involved with them at all. The old BMP, whatever you call them, and all sorts of things, but not the actual work, not the actual thing I produced.
Yes,
And
not the data.
and then everyone started joining in and saying, "Well, and he banned every single person who opposed him on Facebook. Not to do with me. So I got so upset with this, I made a video about him. Yes, I made a video exposing the professor, saying this is not a scientist. Just bans everyone who wants to disagree with him. Everyone, not just me, and doesn't attack the subject at all. Doesn't say why my graph is invalid, which would be a fair point to make if he wants to. Yeah, but no, and that's from a professor. So this green disease has got to some very high levels
Hmm?
in societies throughout the world, and in particular in universities and so on. It really is high.
Yeah,
And
I was very disappointed with the peer review I had on my climate paper, which
yes,
was all about ice ages.
yes,
And some of the comments I thought were ridiculous. One of the comments was, "You don't agree with the consensus, and therefore we cannot pass you through peer review." When does consensus come in with
yeah,
science?
doesn't.
Another chap said that uh, CO2, we were talking about CO2 and being plant food and so on. CO2 is a well mixed gas, and there is the same amount of CO2, a percentage of CO2 at the surface, as there is at high altitude.
Yeah.
And therefore, plants at high altitude will not be starved of CO2. And I thought, hold on a minute. So I actually replied, "You're not really supposed to reply to these peer reviewers." But I said, okay, in that case, why do you have emergency oxygen in aircraft? Because there's the same amount of oxygen, at 35,000
Yeah,
feet that there is on the ground.
yeah,
No response. But yeah, I was very, very disappointed with the peer review that I managed to get. We got it through peer review in the
yeah,
end, but I was disappointed. And the open peer review never happened. So
yeah.
this was the Royal Society. This was supposed to be open peer
I
review
know.
where who your reviewers are,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
refused to
Why? Why would
I
you?
don't know. I don't know. I think, yes, because my paper was so contentious, I think they
You
refused
have to
to say
hide.
who the
You
reviewers
have to
were.
hide behind the screen.
Yeah, basically, the paper proved through paleoclimatology, so the climate of the ice ages, that CO2 was not involved in the ice age modulation.
Yes.
And that's why it was contentious.
It-
So my argument was it was ice albedo, the
yes.
reflectivity of the ice sheets,
Yes.
that was controlling ice age, um, the ice ages themselves,
Yes.
not CO2,
Yes.
because there were
It's
so
a
many
it's a
problems
combination of the
with.
precession and that, isn't it? It's a combination.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Precession is the main
Yeah,
forcing agent,
precession
which is
started it.
the
Yeah.
orbital cycles of the Earth.
Maybe we
But
could do a
there is
zoom
a.
on that. Maybe we can do a
We
zoom on that.
could, yes.
Yeah.
That would perhaps be interesting. Yes.
That would, yeah, because I think that needs to be brought out. Because actually, I'm not being rude here, but the paper's very straightforward.
Yes, it is.
It's straight.
We made it purposely as an easy read paper because
It is.
some papers can get really complex,
I know.
and again they relish in the complexity
I
because
know
it
they do.
makes them look clever
They make them look.
when they're not. So we made this as an easy read because we knew that we would have to have the support of normal people on this particular paper because it was contentious. And
Yes,
so I think anyone can really read this paper and understand it. It's not difficult.
that's right. So we'll do that, and we'll plan on the future. To wrap up, any comments on this latest COP and what's happening on this latest COP meeting that's
Oh,
happening now?
well,
Our prime minister's there.
yes, it's interesting times because now we have Trump has come in, and whatever views people have of Trump, he's going to put the cat in amongst the pigeons
Yes,
here.
yes,
Because he is a rationalist
yes,
instead of a fantasist. And there is a difference here. Whether you like Trump or not, he is not a Miliband. He will actually look at things in a rational fashion and say, excuse me, will this work or not? Is this economical or not? That's what he's good at. That's what he's
yes,
been doing when building office blocks and whatever for his whole life. He looks
yes,
at the economics. Is it going to make a profit? And he's looking at this and thinking that doesn't make any sense. And so he is really going to stir the pudding with the new COP meeting and tell them some home truths.
yeah,
Like, okay, you might like that. That might be your proposal, but it is a fantasy that will never work. You're going to have to find some other way of getting around that if you
yeah.
think that is a problem. So it'll be a very interesting meeting. So, yes.
That's right. Well, I think yeah. Well, look, all I can say is thank you for this interview. I think it's been very interesting. It's finished off my video. It's like a part two of my thing. One of the main comments against me in mine was I'd misspelled. I put an extra L in Miliband.
Right. Yes.
And anyone who can't spell their adversary's name right doesn't deserve to be taken seriously.
Yeah. They love comments like that.
They
They'll
love
find
them. They
one
love
little
them.
tiny, missing punctuation or something and say,
That's right.
well, your
Let's
whole
let's
theory is wrong.
let's try. Yeah, let's try and ignore all the stuff. Yeah, and but I think the worm's beginning to turn. I know we can't afford net zero, so I know
Yes.
it's going to collapse. But it's just how much damage is done on the way with contract
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Because the signing's
And
into
that's
50
the
years.
thing that people will have to be concerned about and rise up against because it's going to cost them an awful lot of money for them to find out that it won't work.
Yes,
But we know that it won't work from day one. So let's not go through that process of
yes,
wasting all of that money because that that waste of money may actually sort of bring the economy down to its knees. So
it
this is
would.
a really important point. We
It
need
would.
to stop these
It
maniacs
destroys
before.
everything. If you've
Yes.
got high price energy and what the scale we're talking about, the intermittency of it, that's going back to third world, going back to
Yes.
intermittent. And we're not helping the third world we're spending 11 billion odd pound a year now. It's more important to give green subsidies abroad to Africa. And the World Bank won't lend them the money for coal. and things. Yes. So the net result is we're actually damaging the third world. But all that's about, and all the summary for policymakers in the from IPCC is about, all it's about is transferring money into underdeveloped countries. And because they've got
Yes.
the vote, there's 190 odd countries, and most of them undeveloped. They just vote for this transfer. And this COP meeting is all about transferring $1 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it's
Into
about.
the third world. But
Yeah.
I think people need to ponder what will happen if we lose electricity. People have very soft and comfortable lives at present. You're not used to power cuts. We used to have them in the 60s all the time, you know. Think of what will happen if there is no electricity for a week or 10 days.
Think
Think of
about
all the
industry,
things that will
all
go
the jobs.
missing.
Plus
No
the death,
water.
plus the
Yeah.
deaths.
No
It's
water,
just, yeah,
no food, no sewage, no gas,
that's
no
right.
heating,
That's
no
right.
lifts in the buildings. So you can't, you know, so all the
Yeah,
buildings will have to empty because the lifts won't work, etc.
yeah,
Um, no traffic, all the traffic lights work.
yeah,
No aircraft, no air traffic
yeah.
travel. Nothing will actually work. You will be back within 10 days without power. You'll be back to the Stone Age.
Yes,
You'll be back to people scavenging food from supermarkets by breaking into a supermarket and stealing the food.
yes.
That's what we will be back to. So people need to ponder the ramifications of what Ed Miliband is going to do, because it could be catastrophic.
Well, totally agree with every word you just said there. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and all I can do is thank you very much. I think you've been very enlightening to the public. I think this has made a good Zoom call. I've recorded it to
Yes.
disk, and I will publish this very quickly. Actually, in the this next week, this will be out.
Lovely.
Uh,
And thank you for all the help you're doing on this, and I hope you have some success over in the Isle of Man because that would be interesting.
Yes, I mean, I've certainly made enemies before I got there. Before I even arrived there, there were some people saying you ought to be banned from coming. He's this, he's this, he's this. And when I found out who they were, one of them was the PR consultant to the wind industry. Yes, and every one of the leaders of it had a vested interest. Every one of them had a vested interest.
Oh yes, yes.
And it was amazing to see the opposition to it. There's a lady there called Sue who really is working to try to change it there, and so it's been a fascinating exercise. And if we can do this, and you can do it at council level, maybe in Britain, which I know we're trying to do. I know Rachel's trying to do over in Canterbury. Yes, uh,
Colchester, yeah.
sorry, Colchester, not Canterbury, Colchester. And so it's fascinating what's going on there. But all we can do is keep on. But we know it's all going to fall down because we haven't got the money, we haven't got the resources, and I think either Ed Miliband goes or the government goes. I can't see it lasting. I can't see the 5 year. I can't even see that because
Yes,
in five
indeed.
years it's 2030. Yeah,
Yes, it's only 5 years away. This is ridiculous, you know.
I
If
know.
you're going to make a change, it's going to take 50 years. It's not going to take
But
five
all these
years.
schemes, they've said in the report, all these schemes basically have got to work. All these untried things and everything got to work, because if they don't, we're into all these fantastic constraint payments and all sorts of things. Yes, we've got to store this energy or use it. And by the way, another one they say on, we'll use cheap energy in surplus cheap energy. No, 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 it's the same price. It's the same
Yes.
price when you get it. Yeah, and it's a contracted price. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I say thank you again, and we'll finish it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.